All right. So, greetings, Seroptimists. Good evening or good morning, depending where you are in the world. Thank you for joining us today for our webinar. We're excited to welcome you to this important learning opportunity focused on trauma awareness and trauma informed practices. We are honored to be joined by Felicia Luo of Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting. Felicia is an expert in the field of trauma and brings a wealth of knowledge and experience. We are grateful for her time and insights today. To begin, let me introduce your Seroptimist program team, led by Aisha D. Brown, our Chief of Impact and Engagement. My name is Sarah Detweiler, and I'm your program manager.
Hello, everyone. My name is Megan Pennick, and I am your program specialist.
We are here today to deepen our understanding of trauma and gain practical tools to apply in our work, and we're glad you're on this journey with us. I have a few quick reminders before we begin. This webinar is being recorded and will be available on our YouTube channel, hopefully by next week, so you can rewatch it or share it with other members who couldn't be here with us today. Please remember that this webinar is being simultaneously interpreted. So if you are listening in English, you may notice that I'm speaking a little slower than usual. That's to ensure our interpreters can keep up and make this session fully accessible. There is a handout available for download under the resources section at the bottom of your screen. If you have any questions during the session, please use the Q&A box in the ribbon at the bottom of your screen. You will also have the opportunity to submit questions in a short survey that will be available to you after the webinar. We will compile all questions from both the Q&A box and the survey, and Felicia will help us respond in a follow-up document that we will share in the coming weeks. And finally, please make sure you're joined on your correct language channel to ensure the best audio experience. A quick but important note before we get started. We also want to acknowledge that this is a sensitive and sometimes heavy topic. We encourage everyone to take care of themselves throughout this webinar. If at any point you feel overwhelmed or need a break, please know that it's completely okay to step away and rejoin when you're ready. Your well-being is important. Self-care is a vital part of this work. So before we begin, we'd love to invite you to share in the chat. What do you do to take care of yourself? So for me, movement is really important. So I like to take long walks by the river or in the woods, and I love to dance. So Megan, would you like to share next what you do for self-care?
I'd love to. So I find the outdoors to be very healing. So whether that's reading outside or writing or just breathing in the fresh air, this really helps me to recharge. What about you, Felicia?
Hi, everybody. My name is Felicia. And for self-care, I love cooking and also trying out new restaurants in my community. And I love just being around my cats. So those are some of the things I do for self-care.
All right, thanks. Thank you both for sharing. And thank you for everyone who's adding your own self-care practices in the chat. We're seeing, um, of course, dancing, seeing a lot of great examples, dancing, walking, resting and strolling, walking with dogs. Excellent. So thank you for all who shared. And now let's get started. So please join me in welcoming Felicia Luo.
Thank you, Sarah. Is everybody able to see this presentation? Yes, perfect. So let me get started. So today we're going to talk about trauma-informed practices and enhancing your trauma awareness and applying your principles in the work that you do. As an introduction, I'm glad that everybody is really eager and have excitedly share where you're from. So maybe share your name if you feel comfortable, how you're feeling today, and what is it that you're hoping to get out of today's training. Gonna leave a couple minutes, a couple seconds for people to respond if they feel inclined to. in regards to what they hope to get out of today's training? Right. Showing a little more. Excellent. Good. Expanding your comfort in working in trauma-informed care, understanding impact. Also, better understanding. Um, Helping those we support. Excellent. Wonderful. All right. Learn better response to those we choose to share. Perfect. Awesome. So before we get started into the training, I wanted to introduce a little bit about myself. My name is Felicia, once again, Felicia Luo. I am the Assistant Clinical Director for a mental health agency called Mango Tree Counseling and Consulting. We are based in Philadelphia, Pennsylvania, and we provide mental health therapy to the larger Asian American communities in Pennsylvania and New Jersey. And our mission is really to go beyond traditional mental health therapy and transform mental health so everybody in the diaspora and the community can feel a sense of home, connection in their minds, bodies, and communities. So we're really trying to understand what the importance and significance of cultural backgrounds, cultural identity, and a lot of that is missing in traditional westernized views of therapy. So we're really trying to hone in on that in the services that we provide for our communities here in Philly and in New Jersey. So again, like Sarah has mentioned earlier, this is a really heavy, can be really overwhelming topic. So if you ever need a moment to reconnect with yourself, ground yourself, please do so. We want you to feel comfortable and safe as we continue this training. So to start with, what exactly is trauma? Right, so trauma is a lasting emotional, psychological, and physical response to an event or series of events that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. It often results from experiences that involve a threat to your safety, loss of control, or a sense of powerlessness, and can significantly impact a person's thoughts, feelings, behaviors, and physical health. And trauma is a very nuanced and complex realm of topic, right? But in the case that we're trying to treat it, we can think of it into two categories: acute or prolonged trauma. So acute trauma is typically a single, sudden, and distressing event that overwhelms a person's ability to cope. A lot of times it's associated with shock, fear, or helplessness immediately or sometime following the incident. So a lot of times we can think of like car accidents, assault, whether that's physical or sexual, um, assaults, and catastrophic events like war, natural disasters as examples of acute trauma, where there's one thing that happened and it created a huge loss of safety and loss of stability. On the other hand, prolonged trauma is an exposure to ongoing and repeated stressful and harmful experiences over an extended period of time. Some examples include childhood neglect, sexual abuse, victims and refugees of war, and typically it builds up an ongoing chronic sense of danger, fear, and instability. As you can see from pictures, this is a child who might be witnessing domestic violence or just instability and chaos in the home. That is an example of prolonged trauma where they're sensing unpredictability, instability, and danger at home. Even beyond the individual level, a lot of times we can see collective trauma for women, right? We can see how trauma happens at a much larger societal level. And here are some examples um, of collective trauma for women. Oftentimes, we will see rules and regulations surrounding women's right to choose or have control over their body. So, an example is the overturn of Roe v. Wade in 2022 in the United States, where it took away the safety and stability of women's abortion rights and right to choose for their own body and left it to the individual states. Other global examples of collective trauma for women might include rape culture, where it normalizes, excuses, or even dismisses any violence against women and children. Or we see high rates of domestic violence, femicide, or under killings in various countries. And other examples include mass displacement and refugee crises, and even child marriages are all examples of collective trauma for women. And I wonder if you would all um, reflect for a moment here and think about what might be some policies, laws, or even societal norms that you can think of that might be impacted by the collective trauma for women. And please use the chat to respond to that question. Oh, yes, I can repeat that. Um, what might be some policies, laws, societal norms that you can think of that are impacted by collective trauma for women, right? Roe v. Wade reversal, absolutely. Trafficking laws, mhm. General lack of equal opportunity for education, employment, unequal pay, absolutely. Women in the workforce, mhm. Yep, in the 1970s, women couldn't get a loan or credit card without their husband's signature, marital abuse, right to vote. Absolutely. The man's world, yep. Domestic violence laws, yeah. Custody laws, yes, absolutely. And boys will be boys, right? The motto of rape culture, victim blaming, a huge part of how rape culture sort of reinforces and thrives within itself. Insecurities of themselves, yep. Prop 57, human trafficking. The lack of focus on women's health. Yeah, these are all really wonderful examples of how a lot of these societal beliefs and culture is shaped by the collective trauma for women. That's excellent. So the way we want to look at trauma is not just on the individual level. We want to understand how each layer of your community, society, country, community at large, and maybe even the world at large impacts and shapes a person. So, as a clinician, we typically are trained to see trauma not usually as acute or prolonged, but also to see how systemically each level shapes the person's upbringing or the way they interact with the world. So think of this ecological model as almost like a Russian nesting doll, right? A story inside each story. In the center, where we see the child, that's the individual that we might be seeing or we might be supporting in the moment. At the micro level, we will see family, close relationships. These are the people that might have the biggest influence on you. They're caregivers, right? You see them hopefully every single day or interact with them the most and shapes who you are in terms of parenting. Then we get up to the mesosystem where it's school, friends, neighborhood. This level usually shapes how you learn, how you behave, and how you feel about yourself in interaction socially. Then we go beyond that to the exo level, or sorry, exosystem, where it is for example, extended family, parents' work, the community, and public. And these are social settings that maybe indirectly influence your development. Then we will see the macro level, and macro system, which is laws, culture, media, and politics, and even some things that are feels like it's far away, like the government or social norms, but it will eventually trickle into your day-to-day life. And then we see the final level of chronosystem that is typically just changes and transitions over time and over life. So that might be divorces, marriages, birth of a sibling, death and loss, and war and natural disasters, or even the pandemic that we all experienced for the last couple of years. So with this, we have to understand how there's the way that things trickle into and shape the person. When we treat an individual, it's not just treating their symptoms, but also understanding what exactly occurred and how they come to impact a person's and their growth. So when we don't have language, we just have our bodies and relationships to act out a trauma. And this is why we're here today, right? To gain language and framework to understand how trauma shows up and what we can do when we witness them. When we live with trauma, but don't have the words to explain our symptoms, to talk about or process what happened to us. And in that way, all our bodies know is pain. And we will express that pain into the way we live our lives, interact with other people, and how we view the world. So it's so important for us to gain understanding and insight and language to understand the ways that our communities and the world has impacted us and through these traumatic events, and so that we have an understanding of why people become the way that they are. And so some of these symptoms of trauma, they show up in our behaviors, they show up in our social engagements, and they show up in our decision making. Some common symptoms of trauma include intrusive memories, flashbacks, nightmares. We see that with a lot of war veterans. They will have a lot of frequent nightmares, flashbacks, avoidance of reminder of that trauma. For example, in the case of the car accident, so if someone has just experienced that, they might not drive for a little bit, or even if they go back into driving, they might avoid the street or the intersection that it occurred in, and as a way to avoid reliving or re-traumatizing themselves in the moment. Other symptoms include low mood, sadness, hopelessness, and negative beliefs, feeling damaged or feeling that, I'm not good enough, I'm worthless. And because a lot of times trauma comes with guilt and shame, especially if the traumatic event is could be stigmatized by the culture or by that society. So that adds on to that feelings of guilt and shame. On the other hand, a lot of times trauma can show up in hyperarousal, so easy to anger, irritability, on edge, and just feeling like you're on the defense all the time. On the other hand, we also see a complete polar opposite of that too, of emotional numbness, right? When our body is holding on to so much tension, um, we tend to also completely disconnect, dissociate, or we don't feel at all. Which also leads to difficulty in concentrating, trouble focusing, and the mind going blank, or just completely consciously dissociating because you're being pulled out of that present moment. Oftentimes, symptoms can also show up physically as well, especially in a lot of countries or cultures where we don't have a lot of understanding about mental health or trauma, right? So, physical symptoms might include gut or digestive problems. I think about my grandma, this little lady from Taiwanese lady, never talked about mental health, never talked about have any understanding about mental health, but she constantly talks about um, stomach aches, right? She's always saying, "Oh, I have a stomach ache," um, but but when she goes to the doctor, they're like, "There's nothing wrong with you," and it really is a lot of anxiety, right, and rumination, and it shows up in the body as pain, as digestive problems, as chronic tension in the body as well, disrupted sleeping, a lot of hormonal dysregulation, And also we have seen uh, throughout lifetime, there is an increased risk for heart and lung disease and an increased risk for a lot of autoimmune system dysfunction with people who have endured either prolonged or acute trauma. On the other hand, trauma also shows up in behaviors, and that might include being in and having higher risk of intimate partner violence, risky sexual behaviors, higher risk of sexually transmitted infections, and also having a difficult time trusting other people, which might lead to detachment and isolation, and in a way that can show up as lack of awareness of social cues. And in children, a lot of maybe truancy, skipping school, lashing out, things like that. Um, and in other cultures, right, in a lot of collectivist cultures where group harmony, family loyalty, and social rules might be really highly valued, trauma shows up differently, right? Because we express emotions, express our thoughts and feelings differently through the cultural lens. So again, a lot of cultures that might not have the understanding of mental health or have much more cohesion in like group and community, the symptoms might show up in, again, somatic symptoms like headaches, stomach aches, fatigue, body aches, emotional distress, and especially when in societies where like an emotional escalation or emotional expression is stigmatized, that becomes a cue for folks to avoid, to maybe withdraw from group activities, family events, or community functions, or we might even see families trying to hide that individual within from public as well. And again, right, the suppression of emotions. They tend to avoid talking about what happened. They might not know how to talk about it. And also in a way to preserve, dignity, respect, or just the idea of not wanting to burden another person or burden their loved ones. So emotional restraint and numbness can also in some cultures be seen as a sign of strength and respect. And this leads to maybe like a lot of shame, right? Hiding, withdrawing, the deep sense of shame that closes them off from um, the other people in their communities and blame themselves from what happened to them, as well as, the deference to authority, especially if the abuse or traumatic event happened and involves authority figures like elders, teachers, or even religious leaders, and they don't want to disrupt that social order. And right, we also think about intergenerational silence, families who may not discuss past traumas that might include war, displacement, colonization, leads to unresolved grief passed down through generations. And we see this actually in a lot of our practices with our clients in clinical work where we are treating, right, the second generation or the children of immigrants, and their family has never talked about being displaced or escaping war or immigration or the migration of their families or people, and yet the grief and the maybe rage, maybe anger continues to be passed down into their children um, as as we as mental illness or as symptoms. And lastly, we also see a collective coping ritual, which might kind of go two separate ways, right? They might avoid or they might not have access to therapy and resources like that. So they might engage in group prayers, ancestral rites, storytellings, and community gatherings as a way to heal, as opposed to going to a medical or mental health professional. On the other hand, when there's also no dialogue or no language to talk about it, we see some compulsive behaviors in order to cope with what they're experiencing. So a lot of times we see addictive behaviors like gambling, shopping addiction, um, and maybe even explosive um, anger in the household. So that was a lot of information in terms of symptoms of trauma. We can talk about how it actually shows up, right? So in this couple pictures here, in the bottom left corner, you'll see this woman who is seemingly very distressed in the doctor's office. So the example goes as this participant has had a long history of sexual abuse and is told during her intake that she will need to go to the hospital due to an extremely high blood pressure reading. And this participant immediately responds with verbal aggression and threatens violence and results in like the police being called. Um, and something to remember with trauma is this idea that the brain, in order to protect ourselves from a traumatic event, will think whatever we did to keep us alive today will probably keep us alive tomorrow. And so the same behaviors that are being utilized in the midst of the danger, when we do the same thing in a different environment, it actually becomes very ineffective, right? So this, if we view this patient and this incident without a trauma-informed lens, we might see this woman as aggressive, uncooperative, combative, really difficult to work with. However, well, and also because of that interpretation, oh, sorry, we might we might then be also equally difficult to work with her or even escalate the situation. On the other hand, if we view this patient with a trauma-informed lens, we will understand that this patient might have felt really coerced to go to the doctor. And because of her history, coercion might feel dangerous to her due to the sexual abuse history and the desire and instinct to protect her body from being examined and possibly hurt by the doctor. And that feeling is similar enough to her feeling danger in the sexual abuse experience. And thus that triggers the angry feeling and the explosive behaviors. And the core beliefs that this woman might have from her experiences is that in relationship, she is either to be abused or abuse, and that's when the reenactment shows up. So the same behaviors that kept her alive in a dangerous situation, we might continue to utilize the same skills in a mundane situation, like being in the doctor's office, but that then becomes ineffective and actually making things worse. And this is what we talk about in terms of when we don't have language, it shows up and it creates drama in our lives, in our relationships, and in our day to day. And on the other hand, you can look at the photos on the top right corner and also the bottom right corner. These are sort of like teenagers being cyberbullied, being humiliated in public settings, whether that is at school or at home. And with teenagers and children, we will tend to see a lot of isolation, withdrawal from social engagements, and changes in their mood regulation. We'll probably see a lot of like lashing out, rage, and low mood, like sadness or hopelessness. What raises a red flag when we see that as practitioners is the idea that these fight, flight, or freeze survival responses are not within their developmental milestones or norms, right? That's how we know when there's something deeper going on, when the responses and behaviors are not aligned with developmental norms. So maybe take some time in the chat if you can. When you think back on your experiences with working with your participants, has there ever been times where you've seen some behaviors that are sort of out of the norm, but you might not have realized that it was indicative or something deeper, or you actually were able to spot it? If you feel comfortable sharing a little bit in the chat. Over revealing. Yep. Lack of boundaries, absolutely. Picking fights, withdrawn, no matter what the discussion is about. People pleasing, talking over someone. Yeah, part of lack of boundaries, right? Someone asked, how do we know if the behavior is trauma-induced or simply a lack of confidence? I think that is part of the beauty of the relationship you might build with your participant is really the idea of trauma-informed care is not just picking at what I will try to talk about in a second here, the idea of like what's wrong, but what happened, right? So you might not know what is the stem of the behavior, but that's part of the trauma-informed care to be curious about what exactly created that behavior. Easily overwhelmed, sleeping all the time, isolation. Perfect. Avoiding eye contact and physical touch. Yeah. Promiscuity. Absolutely. Like early promiscuity that's not aligned with developmental milestones, right? That's a sign potentially of abuse. Awesome. Poor decision making. Awesome. Yeah. All right. So again, so for trauma-informed care, we want to shift from what is wrong with you to what happened to you. We want to approach a client or participant to have a complete picture of her life situation, whether that's her past or her present, in order to provide an effective support and service with healing orientation. So trauma-informed care seeks to realize the widespread impact and understand the path for recovery, recognize the signs and symptoms of trauma in our patients and families, and integrate knowledge about trauma into your policies, procedures, maybe your practices, um, and actively avoid re-traumatization. So, with that being said, we're going to move into how do we actually put in and implement some of these practices when you're working with your participants. All right. So one way that one tool that we can use is something called safety planning. And this is something to really like hone in on the fact that this requires a relationship building with your women and girls that you're working with. It is the main focus of it is to establish a sense of safety that requires patience and trust. This can really be done with your participants one-on-one. A lot of times, safety planning in the clinical work, we use this as a way to, in prevention of like suicidal ideations, homicidal ideations, or self-harm behaviors. So it is a way for us to be prepared if these feelings becomes overwhelming or increases. So some of the examples that you can, oh, before I get there, so you can do this with your participants, whether through verbally as a way to connect, as a way to build a bond, or you can actually write it down with them and have like a little piece of paper as a part of their resources. And so some of the examples of questions that might be a part of your safety planning might be think about what you need to do to calm down. Who do you call for support? Generally, it might be like a family member, um, a spouse, or someone in the community that they trust. In some cases, it might include legal resources, authorities, if that's appropriate. Or we can think about what are some, maybe two, three, five things you can think of to look at when you feel that keeps you safe, keep you calm, and also, what are three things that you can do to feel safe? What are the tools that you can use based on your five senses? A lot of times when we talk about, like when we ask a participant, what's a coping skill? What do you do? They might be like, I don't know. I don't really know what I can do to feel calm. And that's when I tend to come back to the most basic, right? If we don't have things, we can at least use our five senses. So it might be like for your eyes, right? What's your comfort movie? What's a video that you can watch that always makes you laugh or changes your mood? What are some scents or what are some smells that would bring you back to comfort or that you really love? What would be some music that you listen to feel grounded? Or even what might be some things you can eat that calms you down? Um, and so if you guys feel comfortable in the chat, share, who might be your supportive person, what are some activities that makes you feel grounded? And it might be a really good way for you to have examples of um, coping skills and things that helps you feel calm so that you can sort of give examples to your participants as well. Oh my gosh. Oh, hold on. I just lost my PowerPoint. Give me a second. Okay, we are back. Uh, yep, breathing slowly, Diet Coke, journaling, bubble bath, talking to husband, nominee family support. Nice. Walking barefoot outside with a purpose, being with your family, cup of tea, nice dancing. Yeah. So all of these are wonderful examples to know that you have a repertoire of toolbox to be able to keep yourself cool, calm, collected, or even when you're feeling overwhelmed, stressed out, escalated. These are the things that you know for sure are able to keep you feeling safe. Perfect. There we go. And this is another tool that I really love, again, using the five senses. This is a tool that a lot of clinicians love to use called 5, 4, 3, 2, 1. And what it's designed to help a person stay grounded in the moment, especially when they're feeling completely overwhelmed or even in incidences where they're having a panic attack. Right. So, something to remember about trauma is the loss of time. When someone is triggered to by something that reminds them of the traumatic event, it almost brings them back into the time when the danger was happening. So in the midst of a panic attack or the triggering, they kind of lose sense of the present moment and they kind of go back into themselves. Their bodies start to react accordingly with increased heart rate, palpitations, higher blood pressure, or like heavy breathing. Um, so the 5, 4, 3, 2, 1 skill is a way to help a person and guide them through the panic attack or escalation. So you might start with like breathing. Let's talk about breathing. Let's inhale, exhale, like guide them through that. And then you can start by instructing them of like, what is five things you can see in front of them. Please tell me or name five things you can see and have them name five things, right? I can say, I can see my screen, I can see my water bottle, I can see my keyboard, I can see the pen in front of me. I can see uh my phone, right? And then what are four things you can feel? I can feel my Fitbit watch on my wrist. I can feel the clothes on my back. I can feel my hair touching the side of my face. And I can feel my feet on my little stool in the bottom. Three things you can hear. I can hear myself talking. I can hear just general AC running outside. I can hear my cats walking around outside. Two things you can smell, just air, I guess, right now. And one thing you can taste, I just kind of taste my mouth. So you walk them through these five senses in order to help guide them and bring them back to reconnect essentially to the present moment, right? This helps de-escalate someone and helps them through a crisis moment in their mind. Um, And we'll move on to a much larger sort of guideline of the de-escalation. So again, trauma creates a distorted sense of time and space, right? When someone is dysregulated or triggered, it feels like this person is almost like driving a car with no appropriate speed down the highway. And they lose sense of the present and kind of go back in time in a sense. And they start to sense the danger that they've experienced. So when working with someone who is dysregulated, it's really important to follow through with some of the steps of de-escalation. Number one, step zero, actually, making sure that you yourself are grounded and calm in a crisis situation. That might take some reflection on how you want to approach, how you stay calm in a moment before you enter into sort of the realm of helping and supporting another person that is in crisis. And step one, making sure that you are being empathetic and non-judgmental. The name of the game in trauma-informed care is curiosity, asking what's going on, giving space, respecting their personal space, maybe take a step back, giving them time to, like room to breathe, and creating and establish a boundary and safety, right? Sometimes in clinical work with certain populations, when people are in crisis or escalated, we might be trained to take a step back or even stand close to the door, right? That is something in terms of like safety concerns or boundaries that we're setting in the moment. Um, and using non-threatening language, right? Being aware of your own distance and your stance and your posture. Use a gentle and calm tone of voice and um, avoid crossing your arms, making aggressive contact, eye contact, I'm sorry, and pointing fingers, right? Because you don't want to seem like you're approaching or encroaching on their space or being dominant over them. And avoid overreaction. Again, going back to the idea that you yourself have to stay calm and be mindful of your emotions. Focus on the feelings, right, instead of the behavior. Because as we know, right, the behaviors are a manifestation of the danger, the fear that's underneath. So being aware and addressing that they are being feared, sorry, they are in a state of fear or frustration or sadness, and really validating that. And sometimes people who are escalated will be really defensive and really provoking. They might start challenging you, they might start provoking you, they might start asking you questions that are really maybe hurtful sometimes. So that's sort of part of the um, calmness of yourself to avoid that, right? Redirect and do not escalate or engage in those responses. That comes with setting clear boundaries, right? Model the idea of trust and safety and communicate yourself clearly and assertively. And also being able to choose wisely on what you insist of doing in that moment. If there's a request that you're asking of them, if there is something that is going on that you want them to resolve, maybe think about prioritizing what might be an important issue to address in this moment and communicate that. And also being able to be open to compromise. There's some things that maybe can wait when the person is in the state of panic. Um, and also allowing silences and pause. And a lot of times taking breaks can be really powerful to allow emotions to settle. As we know, right, emotions kind of escalate, it goes up and it goes down. It's almost like a bell curve. However, someone, if they continue to be provoked, triggered, that emotion might continue or even go up. So giving it time for emotions to naturally slow down and decrease is a really powerful tool. Um, and lastly, being able to allow them to time for decision making and really focusing on showing respect to her autonomy and giving space for her to make her choices in that moment, and really allowing whatever decision to come can be done after this person is um, de-escalated. Awesome. And so finally, we want to make sure we know that there's not a single, like, one manualized way to treat trauma. There's a lot of different approaches and interventions out there that helps to treat trauma. And also, trauma shows up differently in roles, in functions, and expression throughout culture and societies. So, um, generally, we want to remember that for a holistic approach to trauma-informed care, in anything that we do, we want to ensure that there's consent and safety, right? We want to gain tools, which is what all you guys are doing here today, and language to understand emotions and how to manage them. Um, and this also requires yourself to be able to be aware and know how to manage your own emotions and your own biases or your own thoughts and feelings, especially in moments of like crisis or when you're working with a large group of people. Um, and being able to turn towards developing a relationship, honoring and respecting the framework of relationship. Something to, again, remember the idea that people with trauma are actively trying to recover from broken relationships, right? So understanding what this means will help them move through stuckness and numbness and repetition of the trauma reenactment. And and most importantly, even if you've learned all this knowledge and insight about trauma and how it shows up, the key point here is the relationship you want to build with your participants that will create the sense of safety and trust. And so be authentic, stay curious and non judgmental, and be a consistent and safe person for their journey. And the acronym CARE to kind of wrap it all up. And in closing, um, like being able to work with Seroptimus. I've seen some really amazing work that you guys do. So your role in the organization is very sacred, very powerful. So this is not just a training and just learning about trauma, but also to reflect on your own roles and responsibilities, and the relationship you want to build with the women and girls you are supporting. So has been a really long and rich history of women helping each other move through the world with dignity and respect. And the question, maybe if you feel comfortable right now, to answer in the chat, or even just a question for you to think about as you continue the work that you do. How do you want to support the future of women in your role, and what type of relationship you are able to and want to build with the women and girls that you're working with, so that you can ensure that there is safety, trust, consistency, and that really leads to a trauma-informed care approach in whatever you do with your participants. Yes, I don't know if anybody has any ideas right now, if you want to put in the chat, or they can think about this. But thank you for having me in the webinar, and I'm going to pass it back to Sarah.
Great. Thank you, Felicia. That was so wonderful and informative and so important in the work that we do. Um, yeah, so we are a little early. So if you have any last imparting words, Felicia, before we close up, I think there's just so much we can take away from this. We work with such a diverse group of women and girls, and it's so important for us to, like you said, meet them with curiosity. We don't know what they're experiencing. We don't know what their experiences have been, and so um, incorporating all of that in every interaction that we have is so incredibly important. So, yes, thank you. Yeah. So Felicia, any last words? And I know we still have a little couple more minutes.
Yeah, no,
And I just keep wanting to learn from you. It's so wonderful.
yeah, I think really just emphasis on curiosity, authenticity, and building that relationship with a non-judgmental approach, right? This is the same approach I teach the clinicians that I supervise. A lot of new clinicians might also have the fear of like, oh my God, what if I trigger my participants or I bring up something that they might not want to talk about? And my advice is always take it slow, right? It's all about building a foundation of trust, right? We're not here to just make people talk about things that happen to them and treat it. We want to make sure they know that they feel safe and be on their way of a journey of healing. So in a lot of clinical work, we know that the the success rate is actually in the relationship and therapeutic alliance itself, no matter what interventions or approaches that a clinician choose to use. But the relationship is really the powerful tool in working with anybody, especially people with trauma.
So important. Thank you, Felicia. And I was wondering too if you have any words to impart on in terms of when they're planning programs. If you have any tips, in the planning process of how to make, how to foster a space of safety and in order to create those safe relationships. Mhm.
I don't know if I have any like concrete advices in the moment, but I think again, right, if we're planning a program, there can be a lot of hopefully like equality in the roles that you're implementing or putting into the program. And building again with staff, I think is the same thing. It's the idea of trust and safety, and to know that you are here to work with them, you're here with them in collaboration.
Awesome. Thank you, Felicia. All right, I will stop throwing more questions out at you because, as I said earlier, we will be compiling any any additional questions that came in the Q&A, and feel free to fill out our post-webinar survey and add any questions in there. And we hope to create another resource for all of you that will be accessible, so you can go back, review it, keep learning, as the work is never over, especially in this field. Um,
Absolutely.
awesome. So yeah, thank you again to everyone for being here with us today. We hope this session, helped deepen your understanding of trauma. Um, you know, we all learned a bit more about how to take a more trauma-informed approach in supporting and interacting with programs and participants. Yeah, of course, a special thank you to you, Felicia, for sharing your wisdom, experience, and compassion with us. It's really, truly a privilege to learn from you. To everyone in the chat who shared in the chat, asked questions, your engagement all made this space more impactful, a richer experience. Want to do a quick shout out. Thank you to our amazing interpreters, and to Grace on Tech for making this session accessible and smooth. And also a big thank you for Megan for managing the chat. And so, as I said before, you'll receive a link to a short survey, and we'll also be emailing you the link, I believe tomorrow or today if you're in Asia. And so your feedback always helps us improve and grow. And so any submitted questions today or in the survey, we will be hopefully compiling another helpful resource for all of you, so you can back and keep learning. So on behalf of the Optimus program team, thank you all again. Take care and have a wonderful evening or day wherever you are in the world. Thank you so much.